Hello, everyone. This is Cameron Cope, and I am one of the co-founders of a company called TechnoTutor, for those of you who don't know me necessarily. And I want to talk briefly about, the title of the video is Why You Should Teach Your Kids to Read Early and How to Do It Without Force. The reason why I want to address this point is because one of the biggest, let's say, debates that I see going on currently within the education circles, especially around homeschooling, is whether you should force your kids to read or not, whether you should have kids read early before they're ready or not. And I'm just going to be very direct and straightforward from the perspective that I think the main reason that it's even a debate is because all parents are reacting to the education system as it is, meaning they see their kids go to school, or they see other people's kids go to school, and they see all the bullshit that occurs and all of the force and all of the heartache and the frustration and the tears and the fighting and the complacency and the apathy and all of these things that people experience within school. Not all people experience that, but many do. And as a parent who is interested in homeschooling, it's like you want to avoid all that stuff. You want your child to have a wonderful, fun-filled, loving childhood and not have to go through all like what you might consider as a bunch of like negative stuff and negative experiences and abuse and all that stuff that you experienced in school, most likely, or that maybe your spouse did, or you see other people experiencing. There are other reasons people homeschool, obviously, maybe religious reasons, and lots of other reasons why. But I think one of the main emotional driving forces behind it is you just don't want your child in that environment being forced to do things you don't want them to do. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. As a parent, I don't want anyone to do anything to my child that I can see is not best. And so I 100% empathize with that. The problem comes in when a parent is not trained in how to actually properly educate your child, and there is a best way to educate your child, and we're not necessarily trained in how to do that. Obviously, as parents, it doesn't come with our children don't come with an instruction manual and a how to educate. And I'm sure many people realize that a person can go through 4+ years of school in education and as a teacher and still not really know how to educate a child. They at most know how to manage a classroom. And that isn't to say that there aren't a lot of really passionate teachers who are very good at communicating and teaching children and things like that. But as a whole, when you look at the system, that's generally not what you see. Even if a child or a teacher rather tries really hard, usually the system kind of steps in at some point and says, you got to do things the way we want you to. And I see a lot of teachers leave after 3, 4, 5 years because they're like, this is not what I signed up for. And the statistics show that that's the case. I think half of all new teachers quit within the first 5 years, or at least that was a statistic from a few years ago. So there's obviously a lot of issues there, and I 100% empathize with parents about their children and making choices that they feel are best. But the reason specifically why I want to make this video, other than all of that, because that's just kind of the context for why I'm making the video, but the main reason why is because I see a lot of parents right now falling into a trap, which is I don't want to force my kids to read, and I don't want to force them to learn things, that like you would necessarily, let's say that you would learn in school. I don't want to force my kids to learn to read. And there's a reason why parents don't want to, which I completely agree with, which is I don't want to force them to do something, which is then going to create a consequence later where they feel like they don't want to learn. And it's like a fight and a struggle. And the reality is, if it's a fight and a struggle, they're not learning. So there is no such thing as forcing a child to learn how to read, because you look at the system, you look at what it produces. On the whole, children cannot read and adults cannot read. And just because you can take a book and say the words that are in it and make the sounds that are on the page doesn't mean you can read. Because as someone famously said, to know and not to do is not to know. So if you can't take this book, for example, let's see, where is it? Looking for a specific book here. I don't see it at the moment. Like, if you can't take a book, where is it? It's at the bottom here. Probably can't see it. Here it is. The Intelligent Investor. It's the book that Warren Buffett says, if you want to learn how to invest, read this book. He read it when he was 19 years old, and that's how he made all of his money. And he says everyone else should read it. But when you start flipping through the pages of that book, you realize very quickly how limited your vocabulary is and how you can read the words on the page and make the sounds, but you can't do what it says in there. Definitely not at the level that Warren Buffett's doing it. And at a certain level, I think he knows that that's the case. So who is he really talking to? Just the people who have the education and the ability to read like he did. And when you study his background and everything, you understand where he came from and what he was able to do from a very young age. It wasn't like he just went through the same process everybody else did. That's not the case. So the problem is parents are still trying to educate their children within the same mindset that they got from school. Even though they think they're doing it differently, they're still accepting basic certain fundamental premises that is indoctrination from the larger system as a whole. And one of those is that number one, you know how to read. You don't know how to read. And I just made a perfect example as to why. If you're stuck working a job and you don't have all the money you need, in other words, to have every single thing you desire, then you do not know how to read. That is a fact. Because if you knew how to read, you would know how to make lots of money. You would have financial freedom. You would have none of the problems that 99.9% of the people in this world have, because the 0.1% know how to read at a level that you're not even aware of. And that has a lot to do with their childhood and so forth. So just right off the bat, you have to realize that as a parent, you are trying to educate your child, but you were not educated properly. Whether you went to school or not, you were not educated properly. And you will know deep down, because I'm not here to convince you of anything, because I know what I'm talking about. I have the proof. I have the evidence. My child is 2 years and 9 months old and can read at a first grade level. And we didn't force him to do it. And I'm going to explain that in a moment. I'm going to explain how, because that's the how, right? The how to do it without force. But right now I'm talking about the why you should teach your kids to read early. Okay. So if you can just for a moment put aside that there's any force required or they're not ready to do, like, that you're gonna have to do it before they're ready. Just for a moment, put that aside. And I just want to be clear about why you should do it. So if your objection is, well, I don't want to force them, that's not why, that's how. So just for a moment, put the how aside and focus on the why. Because think of the advantage that my child will have if he's already reading at a first grade level when he's 2.5 and he's comprehending and he's not memorizing. He's not like we've read him a book over and over and he's memorized the words on a page. You give him a book with words that he knows how to read that we've already taught him in TechnoTutor, and you give him a book that he's never seen before, he can read those words. The only reason he wouldn't know is because he doesn't have those words integrated. Just like if you can't read this book because you don't really have all those words integrated, you can sound out some of the words, but it's not really in there. And when I say in there, I mean like a folder on your computer where there's information stored there. So when you see that word, it unfolds and all this information is at your disposal. Like, oh, I know what that word means. I know everything about that word. I know everything it implies. I know everything to do in relation to it. So we're talking about being able to do something. If you just want your kid to be able to read like a trained monkey and basically recite words and it looks like they're reading, this isn't for you. If you want your child to be able to do more in this world, to have a way better life than you had, to be able to solve complex problems that you can't even predict right now because our world is in crisis, and the children that we're raising right now need to have a problem solving and a creative ability well beyond what we got as children and as adults. Way beyond that, because there's a lot of problems in this world. I'm sure you would agree. Okay. So why should your child learn to read early? Because they're going to have a huge advantage over those who don't. They're going to be the leaders, because as they say, leaders are readers. People like to reverse it and say readers are leaders. That's not it. Leaders are readers. Just because you think you can read doesn't mean you're going to be a leader. You have to really know how to read. Okay. The leaders of this world, they know how to read information at a level that you are not aware of. And as another saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. So even what I'm saying right now, you're probably just arguing with me in your mind, or you're like, that's not true. I know how to read. You don't know how to read. Because come take one of our TechnoTutor reading assessments where we're actually going to test your reading ability, and you'll find out very quickly where you really stand. Okay. And we offer those free of charge. So if you want to find out about that, let me know. But my point is, people think that they can read. And I know, because I've been doing this long enough. I've tested people with PhDs, doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people who you think are successful. They can't read. But when you test somebody who's making several $100 million a year or $1 billion a year, or they're a billionaire or whatever, those people can read. So you really don't know what is possible until you see what's possible. Okay. So if you were to go and check out the videos of my son Max and him and his reading ability, you would see that he's reading in a way that you didn't know a 2-year-old could read. Because I see people talking about like, oh, I have the flashcard, and when I show the kid the flashcard, they can say the word. All they're doing is just memorizing. Okay. If you handwrite the word, or you put it in a different font, or you do it in a different context, they're not going to be able to read it. And I know because, where's my other book here? I think I put it on the ground. It's like, have you read this book? Right? Have you read all 4 volumes? Here's volume 3, like I have. Have you read all this? Because if you did, you would know what the state of the art in terms of reading research is. And you would know that first graders in school are not really reading. It says it in the research, and they've known this for a while. They're just memorizing the words on the page because they see it over and over. So when you're talking about flashcards and stuff, it's actually just memorization. Your child's not actually developing an advanced ability to read. But my child is, okay? And we have the proof of that. You can see lots of videos. And if you just sit there and talk to him, you'll see that he's at a totally different level than what you would think is possible for a 2.5-year-old. The other thing is this. It's not just about his ability to read. It's about the nature of his vocabulary and how he's learned these words. Because when you learn something through repetition and memorization, it gets contaminated with all kinds of other things that are going on. So unless you have something that goes straight, direct into the physical integration of the physical body in like quantum speed, then you're getting all kinds of other things associated with it, like the way people feel. Just think about it. When you yell at a 2-year-old, whatever words you're using are now being imprinted with that energy and that emotion, and that becomes a memory inside of them. And when you're in school, that's mostly what you're getting a lot of. And so I totally understand why people react to being in school and all that stuff. I didn't like school, even though I was a National Merit Scholar and I did really well in school. I still didn't like it. And some people do like it. It's a certain personality type, but usually it's those with photographic memories because it comes easy to it. They can memorize it. They can, what do they call it? I forget the word they use, but it's like they memorize it and they dump it. And they just memorize and they dump, and they memorize and they dump it. They don't really retain anything and understand anything. Okay. So what school is catering to is not actual learning. It's just memorization and dumping. Okay. And that's why I think a lot of parents, you know, that deep down, as people going through school and parents, you know, deep down that that's what's occurring. And so you don't want that for your kids. The problem is you throw the baby out with the bathwater because you think, well, therefore, and I'm not saying every parent thinks this way, but a lot of these unschooling parents and homeschooling parents are starting to think like, well, I'm just going to let my child just develop at their own pace in the sense of what they're interested in, and then I'll let that guide the situation. But that's like really problematic because your child isn't born with any interests. And I know it's going to be challenging for some people to hear, but the reality is children are interested in what they're exposed to. So is it a coincidence that a child that grows up listening to rap music all the time, when they get older, they start listening to rap music? Or a child who grows up listening to classical music like I did. When I'm in high school, I'm listening to Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and playing the violin and doing all that stuff. Because when I was little, my mom played classical music for me all the time. So what children are exposed to is generally what they start to become interested in. Now that you could also have a reaction, in which case you do the opposite, but it's still the same thing. It's what you're exposed to is starting to influence what you're interested in or not interested in. Okay. So, a point to consider within that is if you're having to force a child to do something, they're not interested in it. And I think that that's where parents are coming from. It's like, well, I don't want to force them, so I have to wait for them to be interested. But here's the interesting thing. You don't generally think of a 10-month-old as having any interests. Like maybe a little bit, like, oh, they like this little blue bunny toy, but they don't like this one. So you kind of maybe see some influence there or some interest level developing. But generally speaking, you can't say whether a 10-month-old is interested in reading or not. They have no interest level. Like they don't even know what's going on. So let me ask you a question. When they have a 10-month-old, and let's say you're on your phone and your screen's really bright, and your 10-month-old, I think I said 10-year-old again, I meant 10-month-old, and your 10-month-old is looking over at the screen just for a moment. It's catching their attention. Would you define that as an interest? You might not, but it actually is. Meaning because they're looking at the screen, it's like something's catching their attention. It's like, oh, I'm interested in that. What is that? What is that? They see it. They're drawn towards it. So when you consider the possibility that there's a technology, TechnoTutor, that works with the child's natural learning ability, meaning it integrates the information in such a way that it's not about memorizing it. It's literally just building that geometrical structure in the architecture of the child's mind, like that, so that now the child knows it, okay? But you're placing the child in that environment and you're just exposing them to this, then the interest starts to develop. So in other words, the reason why my son, when you talk to him, is so interested in letters is because from a young age, we were exposing them to him using this technology, not forcing. We would, like, if, for example, if I were to sit with him with TechnoTutor and he was like, you know, looking around, I wouldn't be like, no, look at it, look at it. No, that's not what we're doing. It's just constant exposure to the point where as the interest takes hold, then they start to integrate and use the technology and so forth. Now, a lot of what I'm saying right now is not going to make sense because you haven't seen TechnoTutor. You haven't seen how it works, everything. That's going to be up to you to go into our website, techno-tutor.com, fill out an assessment or fill out a contact form, and then we can talk to you about it and show you how it works and all that. Okay, but some of that makes sense in terms of what I'm saying, how I would use it with my son. But my point is this. Because from a young age, we integrated without any force. Like, in other words, do you have to force your child to eat when they're 10 months old? No, you offer it to them. Okay, some people do force their kids, but we've never had to force our kids because within ourselves, we don't get frustrated. We're like, okay, they're not eating right now. Let's come back to that in a moment. Okay, they're not eating. Let's come back to that in a moment. And eventually they'll be hungry and they want to eat, because sometimes maybe you're just trying to force them when they're not hungry. But a child gets hungry every day. So the idea that you don't get interested in letters and reading and numbers and stuff like that until 5 or 6 or 7. I saw somebody make this comment about, most kids aren't interested in reading until 7. That's absolutely not true. That is simply a product of the fact that they're not being exposed to letters and reading and stuff really on a consistent way until they're 5 or 6 years old. Because my child, Max, is extremely interested in letters and numbers. In fact, if there's a choice of toys, that'll be one of the primary things he'll want to play with, and he'll incorporate it into playing. It's really interesting because it's a part of him. Because of the way TechnoTutor works, it's a part of you. Just like you feel like your memories are a part of you. You can't, like if I said to you, just forget all your memories about when you were a child and you had Christmas with your parents and all that stuff, and you'd be like, no way, that's who I am. That's my memories. That's how he is with the letters and the alphabet and words now, because we're also teaching him words in TechnoTutor. They've become a part of his memory structure. So when you're memorizing, the ironic thing about it is when you memorize stuff, it doesn't actually become a part of your memory structure. It's in your short term. That's what memorization is. You can memorize a speech, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to forget most of it. Now, I know there's all those examples of that one thing you did over and over, and you still remember it. But I guarantee you there was some really strong emotional component wrapped up in there for whatever reason, and that's actually why you're memorizing it. Emotions are a very strong component of learning, but they don't have to be. The interesting thing is when you bring emotions into the learning process, it actually creates dysfunctions later in life. And you may not realize that right now, but think of an emotion as like a little shot of electricity. And so if you have all these emotions running through you when you're reading, even at a subconscious or unconscious level, and when you're learning stuff or when people are talking, it's like running through your body and causing all this interference. And it's like electrical interference patterns. So I know that's technical, but that is the reality of how it works. So there's so much that parents do not understand. Like, do you understand how your child is learning information at the same level that a computer engineer understands what is going on underneath, your computer in the hard drive and so forth? Because your body is just like a computer from a certain perspective, that there's a lot of stuff going on that's processing. I mean, think about all the chemical reactions and all of that stuff. And when you're learning something, there's chemical reactions that are occurring that's storing that information in various ways in your body. It's not like just this random thing that's occurring. There's a physical, chemical process, electrical process, a lot of detailed mechanical engineering type things going on that are occurring for you to remember something. And as parents, you don't know any of that. You just think, oh, if I just put my kid in school or if I just talk to them, suddenly they're going to learn stuff. Here's the interesting thing. Your body is born with this natural ability to learn. But the unfortunate thing is that, especially because we're in the information age now and there's computers, and why is this relevant? Computers, iPads, TV, all these things, what they all actually represent is the ability of corporations to access your child's natural learning ability. So for the parents, and I wish I'd said this in the beginning of the video, because this is the most important part that parents, especially unschooling parents, need to understand. Whether you get your child to read when they're 2 or 7, or let me rephrase that. Whether you wait till your child is interested in reading or not, they are still learning the entire time. But what they're learning is, well, actually, I'll tell you an interesting thing. In that handbook of reading research, which if you have some time, you should read this. Okay, and there's 4 volumes. I think there's 4 volumes. It's all the reading research that was done from like the 1984, the year I was born, until basically the last 6 or 7 years. Okay. In that book, it explains that children are not actually learning to read, like they're just memorizing stuff when they're in 1st grade. So they're just memorizing the words on the page, the sound. They're not actually like decoding the words and so forth. On average, 1st graders are not. Okay, and it's not because they're not capable, it's just because of the way they're being taught. But it says where they get the most exposure from a young age in terms of learning words, but mostly letters and symbols, is through advertising. So what's interesting is that because as a parent, you don't know how to get the symbols and the letters and the words into your child first, where they're actually learning them from is through advertising. Just because your child can't produce the sound or the word or read it doesn't mean it's not in there. The problem is now the letters, like think about the word McDonald's. Every time your child sees that, and the emotions and the symbolism and the advertising and everything and the feelings when they eat the McDonald's or they see other people eating or whatever it is, all of that is being imprinted into your child. And that's why the advertising or the big corporations spend so much on trying to advertise to children in whatever way they can, because they know if they get them in the first 7 years, really the first 3 to 5, they'll have them for life. That is a fact. And so the problem is this natural learning ability that your child has starts to shut down. They used to say it took 7 years. Now researchers are finding it takes now about 3 to 5 years before it really starts to shut down. And that's because it's like a computer. You get a brand new computer, it's really fast. Over time, what happens? You download stuff, you put new programs, it starts to fill up, it can't take anymore. And it's just like slow. And isn't that what happens with children? They go to school after a few years, they start to slow down, and it's like, man, when my child was 2, if I said anything around them, they would immediately repeat it. But now they're 12 and they're sitting in school and the teacher's talking for 3 hours and they can't remember a damn thing they said. Do you see? It's the natural learning ability. It starts to shut down. It starts to close off. So as a parent, the biggest why you should teach your kids to read early is because if you wait until they're 7, their natural learning ability is not really operational anymore. And they're not really going to learn much. They're just going to memorize stuff. And this is a problem because we live in the age of information, where we can't predict what jobs are going to be available in the next 10 to 15 years. We really can't. You couldn't have predicted Uber 25 years ago because there weren't really smartphones. I mean, there weren't smartphones back then. So it's vital as a parent that you understand why you need to have your kids learn how to read early. Now, I'm not going to say you need to teach them. They need to learn how to read. Teaching is like you're trying to explain something, but you don't actually have to explain much when it comes to reading if the child can recognize the symbols, as if it's like they just recognize your face. It's like they see you a lot. They see you right away. Like actually, they recognize your face the first thing. Like my son, when he meets somebody new and you tell him their name, he knows who they are. You don't have to tell him again. It's in very rare cases, actually with him never, but I'm saying it's in very rare cases that if I saw somebody, I wouldn't recognize them again. Okay, now whether you know their name or not is a matter of whether your learning ability is open or not. But you see somebody, you see their face, you're going to see it again. We have this built-in ability out of survival that we recognize faces very readily and very easily, and we integrate that information. from a young age, we have that about everything. So that's why if you put a child in a very poor, low socioeconomic status home, 99.9 times out of 100, point whatever, 0.01, they're not going to ever be successful in life from the perspective of having anything just more than having a job and being another slave in the system just like everybody else. And they're probably going to have the same problems as everybody else. And they're probably not even going to be successful even from the perspective of making a lot of money. And the thing is not my opinion, it's a fact. Look at the research. It proves this over and over and over and over and over and over again. Everybody likes to look at like Richard Branson. He's like, he was in poverty and now he's so rich. Yeah, but how many times does that happen? There's only like less than 1,000 billionaires in the world or something like that, around 1,000. So obviously it's not like all these massively poor people are just randomly getting rich. Like that's called an example that's used to get you to focus on something that's not going to matter. Like you can't take Richard Branson's life and be like, well, I'm going to keep my kid poor then because that's the key to success. Obviously it's not. He is called an exception to the rule. So you're a part of the 99.9%. It's unlikely your child will ever be successful because in their natural learning ability phase, those first 3 to 5, maximum 7 years, they weren't getting the same thing that everybody else who's in the elite class was getting. They weren't being imprinted with the same memories, the same ideas, the same manner of speech, all of those things. So basically 99.9% of people and their children are screwed unless they know how to take advantage properly of that natural learning ability. And here's the cool thing. When you use TechnoTutor, this works even for adults. So imagine if you were able to learn again as an adult, like when you were in those first 3 years of your life. Okay, I mean, I could say that, you wouldn't believe it. You would have to see it. And that's the cool thing about this. You can see it happen for yourself in real time. But that's something you'll have to find out for yourself. How to do it without force. So hopefully the why is clear. As a parent, the only reason I think you would say you don't want your child to read early or learn to read early is because you're afraid that it's going to require force and they're going to create some dysfunction. They're going to resist it. And for some reason you believe it's harmful. It's not harmful for your child to be able to read and understand. Like my child, we don't have to force him to brush his teeth. We just talk about it and then he lets me do it and we have fun doing it. And he sits there and holds his mouth open while I do everything. And I say, show me E. And he goes, E. And then I do it. Show me ah. And then he brushes my teeth. So he's getting practice of how to brush teeth. So when he's ready, he can do it for himself. Right? So, but that's communication. Because we've built his vocabulary using the natural learning abilities from such a young age, he's now at a point where he can communicate with us in ways that, as most parents of a 2-year-old would not even believe is possible. That's why we put a lot of videos and stuff on our Facebook and our Facebook pages, Education is Evolution, and so forth. So you can see that. And for those who have met us in person and seen Max in person, they're like, whoa, it's even better than I realized just from those videos you post. It's real. So how to do it without force. Going back to this point I was making, like when Max was around, I think 11 months old, we started using TechnoTutor with him to integrate the symbols, the letters, upper and lower case. And since they became a part of him using the technology, he started showing interest in letters. And then at a certain point when he was older, after he had mastered the upper and lowercase letters and all the numbers from 0 through 20, like he could see 19 and know it's 19. He started being able to understand the time on the clock. So just because I was able to explain to him the big hand and the shorthand and which one determines the time, he could tell the shorthand which hour it was closest to. So he could basically get the time within 30 minutes of the correct time when he was like less than 2 years old, because he could see the number. He could be like, oh, it's 7. And it might be like 7:15 or 6:45, but he could basically tell the time. And now he's starting to understand the minute hand. The only limitation within understanding the minute hand is multiplication, which is based on the numbers being clear. So at a certain point, he's already learning addition now, right? He knows some very basic addition facts now, but he'll be learning multiplication whenever he's ready for it. But the readiness will come because the symbols are integrated. So what I'm saying is, it's not about waiting till your child is ready. It's preparing them so that they're ready. You don't, let's say you're a boxer. You don't go into the ring when you feel ready. You go into the ring when you're prepared. Like, you will feel ready to a certain degree when you're prepared, when you've practiced a lot. That's when you feel ready. And so children generally are not going to feel ready till they're 7 years old, because they've had to be exposed to it so much that they're like, okay, I guess I'll do it. Or they see all these reasons why. But the problem is, at that point, their natural learning ability is so, like, it's like right at the edge, if it's even there at all. So when they're reading stuff now, what are they actually understanding from it? What are they actually going to be able to do from it? And the problem is, as a parent, if you're doing this unschooling stuff, which, I mean, I'm not saying you should put your kids in school or whatever, but I'm saying if you're doing it and you're trying to wait, problem is you're playing Russian roulette with your kid's life. Because what happens when they're 15 and, okay, maybe they can read and sound out the words and read a book, but they've lost 7 years or 5 years of being able to understand things. And so, like, my son, for example, understands things that you would not expect him to understand, because he's already starting to read and his vocabulary is so advanced that we can explain things to him that you normally couldn't explain to a 2.5-year-old. And we have to do that because we always explain everything. So if he asks me why, I always explain. If he says why again, I explain. I go further, I go deeper, I go more. So he's developing this understanding way beyond what is possible. So now as he starts to read books when he's 5 and 6 and 7, can you imagine what he's going to be reading and the things he's going to understand? Every parent wants their child to be a genius. And if you say you don't, then you're just lying. It's just because you don't think it's possible. But this is how genius develops. This is how it's done. And what I'm saying is, if you wait until your child is ready to learn, but you don't realize it's your responsibility to prepare them to be ready, you're totally missing the point. And so another point to consider, the biggest point to consider, is we prepared Max to be ready to read. He's not reading at 2.5 because that was just naturally when he was ready. He's ready to read at 2.5 because he understood the letters. Well, first of all, he knows what the words, he can recognize the words. But before that, he was able to recognize the letters. And before that, we started exposing him using TechnoTutor to the letters in the alphabet and the symbols like plus and minus. And he can tell you where the semicolon is. And he wants to sit here and type. Like, one of his favorite things to do is to sit and type on the keyboard, like punctuation, and hold shift and do the $sign. He can do all that himself. Like, he can type himself words. And he's 2 years and 9 months old. And like when we have like those little letter cutout things, like magnets for the fridge and little wooden letters and stuff like that, which, by the way, we didn't use to teach him the letters. Those we only got him after he had integrated everything in TechnoTutor. I will make a post as a comment after the video is over of a blog post and a video that I did talking more detail about the timeline of him learning, because I'm not going to go into all that. I already did that. But my point is, he likes to take those letters and arrange them into words. So it's not like you could just show him a flashcard of cat and he can say what it is. Like, he'd go to the fridge and he'll put CAT and be like, cat. Like, that's coming from within him. That's not a force. That's coming without. It's like he enjoys it. So you will enjoy what you're good at. And if it's a part of you, you'll be good at it. That's just how it works. It's like, look, if you take a baby when they're 1 month old, an American baby, but you take them to China and give them to Chinese parents, and you come back 20 years later, they'll be speaking Chinese. Culturally, they will be Chinese. And you could say, well, you forced them to be Chinese. Well, you're forcing the kid to be American if you keep them here. The environment is going to impulse them and get them to develop into an American. So you got to like stop this point about force. Yes, does the school system force children? Yes. But it's all just based on memory. The purpose of the school system is not to teach you anything. It's to filter society, to find those with the photographic memories, people like me, that can then go on and become the National Merit Scholars and go to the elite universities, just like Bill Gates did, just like Jeff Bezos, all those people. I was one of those people who went to one of those elite universities, and I was like, screw this. I don't want to be a part of this. I want to actually make a difference in this world. I don't want to just keep the system going. But you know what I wasn't doing when I was 2 years old? I wasn't reading. Because I get people saying, well, maybe your child is just because you're really smart. I wasn't reading when I was 2, neither was my wife. I don't think I learned to read until I was maybe 4 or 5. Okay, so I'm not some anomaly, and neither is he. We're taking an engineering approach to developing our child's ability to read. We are not trying to force him into one area or another. I'm not trying to make him an engineer. I'm not trying to make him a doctor, a lawyer. All I'm doing is preparing him with the ability to process information so that no matter what he encounters as a problem, no matter what he needs to read, no matter who he needs to communicate with, no matter what he needs to understand, by the time he's an adult, he will be able to process and understand and communicate and express and do anything he wants. Because until your child has developed the ability to fully process information, they don't know what their interests are. Because until they can process information effectively, their interests are limited to what they understand. And so if you're able to understand and do anything, then what would you be interested in then? That's the real question you have to ask yourself. So as a parent, you need to stop putting your bias into the education process and realize that there is a best way to do it. And we are showing you the proof with our 2.5-year-old. And guess what? Our daughter, Seneca, is 10 months old, and now she's using TechnoTutor around the same age as Max did. Not because she's ready for it. How do we know she was ready? Because she started, whenever we're on our phone, she was looking at it. It was holding her attention for a moment. We're not like putting it up to her face. Like our kids don't use phones and iPads. But if we're like on our phone or something, talking, texting somebody or whatever, and the kid's like noticing the screen, then I'm like, okay, now her attention ability level is at a point where she can focus on a screen for a moment. And so now we're using TechnoTutor with her. And my wife is doing that primarily because she's the one who's mostly responsible for the kids' education. Although I use TechnoTutor with Max on many occasions before we go to bed sometimes. And I ask him, you know what I say? Max, do you want to learn some words right now? And he'll either say yes or he'll say no. If he says no, I say, okay, what would you like to do? He'll say, I want to play cars or whatever. Okay. Yes? Okay, what words do you want to learn? I'll pull out a book that we haven't read, and I'll say, what about these words? If we learn these words, we'll be able to read this book. And he'll say, okay, cool. Because then we put the words in, we do the process, he integrates them, I pull out the book, I haven't read it to him before, and I say, what's that word? And then he tells me the word because he recognizes it. So this is totally beyond what anybody realizes as possible. So whatever your preconceived notions are, what I'm telling you is, what do you have to lose here? What if there was a way that your child could be reading when they're 2.5 or 3 or 4 or 5 at an advanced level? So even if your kid's already 5 or 6, definitely do this, because this is the only thing that is going to work with that natural learning ability and reopen that point. So that way, whatever it is they're learning, whether it's in school or homeschool or whatever, they'll be able to really actually learn it and integrate it and process it and produce something creative with it. Because unless it's really in here, if it's memorized, that means you're still having to think about it. So if you're having to think about it, that means you're not going to be creative. Because you should be thinking about what you want to create based on you just know things. And so words and wordplay and communication and expression and writing and reading and all those things can be a creative activity when the symbols, when the words are integrated properly. And that is what TechnoTutor does. That is what it can do. That is the potential that it presents for you and for your children. You don't have to take my word for it. All you have to do is go to techno-tutor.com, TUTOR.com, TECHNO-tutor.com/contact, or go to the contact page. You can see our interviews on there with Donald Trump Jr. Back in, I think, 2014, before we even knew that he's going to be the president's son one day. We had no idea. We also have an interview with William Shatner on our website that's up there that we did on TV as well. So, really, what do you have to lose? Because the only thing you have to lose is really your child when they're a teenager, when they're an adult, because they're not going to respect you anymore if they know that you were given the opportunity to give them a superior education and you didn't. Like, they're good, because this is going to be a mainstream household name in education. It will be the name in education because it works like gravity. It just works. You can't deny it. Our child is not special. He's a very normal little 2.5-year-old, 9-month-old boy, but he can read at first grade level and he communicates with us and he doesn't throw temper tantrums. He doesn't throw fits. He doesn't do all that stuff that parents worry about, and we don't punish him and we don't reward him, because if you reward a child, you're actually using force. And I bet you didn't think about that. Maybe you did. I think there's a lot of parents out there who are starting to realize that when you use rewards to manipulate a child, that's the same thing as using punishment. You're still just manipulating them to do something. They're not doing it from an understanding that's coming from within. And the major problem is you're creating a point where they're now susceptible to being manipulated by rewards from without. I'm an entrepreneur. The only thing I'm motivated by is making a difference, providing value, getting the result that I'm looking for. People don't manipulate me with rewards of some flashy, shiny thing. I'm motivated, and the reward for me is when my child does well at something, when I create something, when I get a result, not from, oh, here's a little thing, come do what I want, I'll give you this little reward. That to me is irrelevant. I will go and I will delay gratification until I get the result that I know is best. And when you have a child that isn't manipulated by rewards and punishment, then that's the attitude they will have as an adult. And I'm going to give to my child what I didn't have as a child, which is a superior education. And if that's what you want to give to your children, please send us a message. Contact us however you want. Put a comment here, send me a private message. Go like our page at TechnoTutor. You can see more videos of Max. Go to Education is Evolution. Search the page on Facebook. We have lots of videos of Max on there. You can reach us any of those ways. But at the end of the day, my goal is to support you to help your child become one of those children and one of those adults in the 21st century that isn't looking for a job, because there won't be any jobs, first of all, but they won't need to look for one because they're going to be creating something. They're going to be doing something with all this new technology that's coming out, something creative. That's all Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all these people did. They just did something creative with technology. They weren't looking for a job. They were out there creating because they knew a lot of stuff. And in the 21st century, if your child isn't learning to read until they're 7, and my child's learning to read by the time he's 2, he's going to know a lot more. And when there's not a lot of jobs out there, where's your child going to be left? And if you're not thinking about these things as a parent, that's a problem. You need to be thinking about these things now, especially if you're not you're not putting your kid in school, especially if you're not, because they're not going to even have any sort of certification in the system whatsoever. And if they can't read effectively, and do you really want to gamble? Do you really want to wait until they're 15 to see, okay, they didn't learn to read till they were 7 or 8. It's not about being able to say the words on the page. It's about being able to do something with that knowledge. Okay, so hopefully that is helpful. If you have any more questions or you're unclear, just put a comment and I'll respond. I'll do my best to make it make more sense. But I have lots of other videos. You can check me out on my Facebook, the stuff that's available there. But I'm happy to answer any questions in the comments, all right? Please share this video and like it if you enjoyed it. And then I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.